This is the second part of cultural geography, the introductory chapter of our cultural geography class. So as we continue, we're going to go over a few slides just to review what we talked about in the last chapter. In the last part of this video, part 1, and this is part 2, human geography, people, place, and culture. Introduction to Human Geography, Chapter 1. And we talked about geography being the study of the earth and everything on the earth. We also said it was the first academic subject, and it encompasses all of the sciences, biology, botany, humans, human cultures, climate, geology, agriculture, transportation, and various others. We did differentiate between physical geography and human geography, and talking that physical deals with the physical earth. If you were to take man off of it, and you have whatever the products are that grow, agriculture, well, agriculture itself is a human concept, but biology, zoology, ecology, and meteorology, geology, and astrology are technically dealing with the physical world, while the human world, the study of human geography, includes archaeology and anthropology, which is the study of humans and how they have changed and how they began from their earliest beginnings. Historical geography, which is history, economic geography, which is economics, migration geography is movement of people, political studies is about government, medical geography is about how medicine has varied around the world from one country to the next. Urban geography is about towns and cities, how we set them up, how we organize them. And then, of course, we have transportation. We have several others that are not listed here. They usually fall into these: the development, industrial service, industry and services, agriculture as it is used and grown by humans, environment, population and health, culture, religion, urban studies meaning cities, study of cities, the migration, the study of people that have moved, language, politics, and globalization. And this was the first picture you saw. And of course, if you remember, I did ask you to look at these pictures and see what culture you did see in them. And you'll notice that they have cars, they have motorcycles, they kind of park wherever they want in these streets, just leaving a narrow path to drive down between. The signs are mostly English. And we get the idea this is India because of the clothing and the way the men have dressed, but not all of the men are dressed this way. Some are dressed in long sleeve shirts with collars. Most of them are not tucked in. And looks like they use the motorcycles more for a conveyance of all sorts of things, very small cars. They have different things that are hanging. There are wires in the windows. There are signs all over. It's basically cluttered. But I think you can see that there is mostly things that you could characteristically associate with someone from India. If this sign down here that said Mumbai was not there, Mumbai, India. And human geography focuses on how people make places, their places where they live, their cities, their towns, their states, how we organize space and society, how we interact with each other, and how we make sense of ourselves and others. Now, on this number 2, how we organize space and society, they're not talking about outer space. They're talking about the space on the ground and the surface of the earth. So how do we make sense of ourselves is going to be something we'll be closely talking about. Again, here we have the same picture that was introduced to us as we entered this chapter. And the point they're talking about in this particular one is sequent occupants, the occupation of a certain area um, after several different occupants have lived there. For example, um, Great Britain was conquered by the Celts, and the people that were originally there were the Druids. It was later further conquered by the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes. And so each one of these will leave a layer of their culture behind. It was later then conquered by the Romans and Gauls. And so, each one of those layers can be dug up and can be found. You can still find the wall of Hadrian that runs through England, which had been the divider for the English against all of those natural citizens that had already lived there, the original occupants. Anyway, so sequent occupants refers to sequence of imprints of the occupants who take over, whose impacts are layered one on top of the other, each layer having some impacts on the next. Here in Mumbai on the left and Dar es Salaam on the right, the apartment buildings throughout Mumbai and India are typically 4 stories. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 stories with a balcony. And sometimes they consider that balcony an extra room, and they may even box it in or wall it in and live on that section, not considering it as a balcony. In Dar es Salaam, in Tanzania, there are also 4 stories, and they're mostly walk-ups, meaning that they have stairs, they don't have elevators. They have a laundry and other household items are festooned on their balconies. And in the doorways, especially on the right, stands a single-family African dwelling where it once stood, reflecting the sequent occupants of the city. And so here you have that one story right there, occupants of the city in the Dar es Salaam picture. Now here, on this particular slide, this is a picture of where they are digging down into the earth to find any types of artifacts that they can to date this area and any occupants that have lived here. And you can see there are very clearly different layers that have been put in one on top of another over time. And they're standing on 3 certain layers that had once been surfaces, and they are not even the top surface. There is one that's above this man with the orange hat, right at his shoulder. But you can see that some of these stones were laid one on top of each other, and so they have been built as buildings. And if you can dig down far enough, you may be able to go through each one of these layers and find small artifacts or even very large ones, tombs, and that sort of thing. Previous owners. Here's another dig that was important, and you can see that this is a wall that's in the center of this particular slide and this particular hole. And you can see some of the stacks of stones that stack on top of each other or once had. And they are gently brushing and bringing up small artifacts to be able to add to their groups, and they will be able to later determine where these small artifacts originated to be able to decide whether they were of which nation or nationality, Aryan or whatever. Geographers who practice fieldwork keep their eyes open, and they are always looking around them as they travel. And because they have been looking and have become practiced in being able to read the cultural landscapes, they are able to tell you more about what is in the area than you would normally be able to see. I had a friend who took us through on a walk once, and they said you look up, you look down, and then you look all around, because there are certain things above you. Like if you were in Mumbai and you looked up, you could see all of those apartment levels. If you look down, you might be able to read something on the ground as far as manhole covers. Manhole covers can be for different purposes, like for the electricity, for the sewers, or for a transportation system to be able to for men to walk down underneath and to be able to take care of problems in one of those areas. But you try to read the cultural landscape. It says choose one thing in the landscape and ask yourself, what is that and why is it there? How might the existence of that thing influence the future development of the neighborhood? And then you take your own time to find the answers. So how do geographers use maps, and what do maps tell us? Cartography is the art and science of making maps. There are two major types of maps are reference maps and thematic maps. Reference maps show locations of places and geographic features. Thematic maps kind of tell stories. Not the kind of stories, like Hansel and Gretel, but they do tell a story. Typically, they show the degree of some attribute or some movement of a geographic phenomena. People who have moved. One year it may not have had a certain group of people, and within the next 10 years, there may have been an influx of a certain culture into a country. That's an example. Now, on this slide that showed the two pictures of Arkansas, these are reference maps. And if you look closely, you would be able to see that the map on the left is fairly similar to the map on the right. The map on the right is a hydrology map, and it shows the lakes and major rivers of Arkansas. You could probably make 30, 40 times more of those for the smaller tributaries that are flowing into these major rivers. But that is what the purpose of that map is, to show you where the lakes and rivers are. The map on the left, on the other hand, is showing you highways. So the physical map on the right is related to the cultural map on the left. It becomes a cultural map when you put the highways on. So if you take man off the earth, what you're left with is the physical. When you put man back on the earth and whatever he builds, constructs, whatever else, that is then the cultural map. You'll notice that there are some rivers. The Arkansas River itself starts over around Fort Smith and travels across Arkansas, across the different counties, down into Pulaski County, and exits further on south at a location close to Lake Village. And but there are also roads that are coming from the northeast and diagonally across Arkansas, pass through Pulaski County and goes on down to Texarkana. Some of the original paths were along the Arkansas River and other rivers that are in Arkansas. They were developed by the first inhabitants, the Native Americans. And as they built their own natural trails, the highways and roads were soon to follow directly after that. Railroads were also put in along these major routes. And so if you were to lay them side by side, you would probably see they all follow some of the same patterns. But most of these still are just reference maps. They're not really telling us stories. This is a thematic map, and it is showing us where the wealthiest Americans are living by state. And in doing that, it's also telling you which of these states are wealthier than the others. Now, the color that's supposed to show the wealth is supposed to be, the more wealthier you are, the bluer your state is, or bluish gray. And you'll notice that Bill Gates is up in Washington on the very far left, and he makes, or at the time this map was made, $76 billion, and that was how much he had accumulated. Warren Buffett in the true blue color, which is not really dark blue or anything, but it is blue, makes 58 billion. Larry Ellison was 48 billion, and then it goes on down from there. The Koch brothers, there's Charles Koch that makes $40 billion, and then there's David Koch, who is up in New York, and he's got 40 billion also. Arkansas is not doing bad. We had the Waltons. Alice moved to Texas, so it kind of pulled our state down, or we would have been one of the wealthiest ones. You'll notice it's 34 billion, 0.78, and she supposedly has 35 billion. So together that would have been almost 70. So we wouldn't have been far behind Bill Gates. But as you can see, this one is mostly showing us where people live that have money. And some of the poorer states are the ones that are the redder states, like Missouri, Mississippi, and Alabama have some of the poorer ones. And Jim Justice in West Virginia is another one. But we could talk about who are where on here. But I think it's a visual that stands out to you without having to really even look at the numbers and check the numbers to be able to see, because you can tell by the colors that what is being represented. By the way, this one is what we call like a quintile map, because it will usually shade in 5 or 6 different colors. Our quartile will only do like 4, but it can speak without having a lot of words. Why do geographers use maps? Well, it's obvious. We have to sometimes record where we have been or where we're going. It helps us to be able to follow paths to go where we need to go. Reference maps especially focus on accuracy, showing absolute locations, the latitude, the longitude, the address of places. It uses coordinate systems that allow for the precise plotting on where on Earth something is. Of course, today's maps are run through computers, and so they are more accurate than even the maps of the past. We use satellites to help position our locations, and these are satellite-based global positioning systems, GPS, which allow us to locate things on the surface of the Earth with extraordinary accuracy. And not only can you do it once, you can repeat it many, many times after, because it's stored in the computer. It can be upgraded, updated, and very quickly so. Supposedly you can click on that nav star, and it's supposed to take you to one of the original companies that handled GPS. However, I think this link is no longer a accurate link, and if you just typed in Navstar and went to the site, I believe you would have better look at seeing the system of these orbiting satellites that are designed by Global Positioning. Now, if you walk outside at night, if you know where your satellites are supposed to be, and you can look it up on the internet, you can see where certain satellites are supposed to go overhead at the precise moment they're supposed to be going over. So you might want to someday go out and check out the stars and see if you can find a satellite. Why do geographers use maps? Let's keep going. The thematic map, on the other hand, tells stories showing the degree of some attribute or the movement of a geographic phenomena. Now, if we look on the right, you'll notice that we're looking at Chicago, and it is at the very bottom of Lake Michigan on this map. Now, that's a kind of a misquote because it's not at the bottom. It's over to the west and south of Lake Michigan. Um, I had some professors in the past who used to always say at the top of the map, at the bottom of the map, but there really is not a top or a bottom because the earth is round. And so you're basically talking about north and south and east and west. So in this particular map, it's showing where Chicago is and all the roads that tend, the major roads in these areas, and how they all tend to lead to Chicago. So Chicago is connected or interconnected with all of the lands that surround it. And there are different roads and transportation systems. If you look at the key, you'll notice it says that there are railroads, which are represented by a blue dotted line. A thin line that's kind of a reddish orange is the major highways. And then the dark red line is supposed to be the time zone. So you can see that most of them connect with Chicago, entering Chicago and exiting Chicago. And there really aren't a lot of roads that don't on this map go there. There are a few, but not a lot. Now, relative location, we've already talked about, describes the location of a place in relation to other human and physical features. So if you were to tell somebody where you lived, you might say, oh, I live on H Street, the third block, across the street from the old hospital or the old church or the old elementary school or something like that. And that way you would be relating your location to something else which they may know. And you may not have to tell them anymore. However, they don't know where those places are. Or if somebody has come in and demolished any of those, you're going to have to come up with another landmark of which you're going to be relating your location. That's relative location. Why do geographers use maps? And what do maps tell us? Now, we've already talked about absolute location. Absolute is either the address or latitude and longitude, and those don't change. Supposedly the numbers don't change. Now, we'll tell you that in our history, we have changed people's addresses because it used to be that our addresses, we lived in the country, were something like Rural Route 3, Box 44. And you just really can't do that anymore because nobody knew what Rural Route 3 was unless you were the mailman. So in trying to get everybody on a system, a grid system, they assigned highway numbers to those roads that used to be like rural route, and then they got a box number that was associated with whatever the road was that they were on. And so now they are more absolute as far as addresses go in the rural locations. Relative locations are constantly being modified and change over time, just as buildings come and buildings go. And if you were referencing, if your reference was the Kentucky Fried Chicken store or the McDonald's that used to be located on Park Hill, you have to change those references now to something else because both the Kentucky Fried Chicken and that McDonald's closed in Park Hill. While McDonald's it moved kind of up to where the Indian Hill Shopping Center is on Highway 107, and the old building itself became a rental center. The Kentucky Fried Chicken became a comic book store before becoming another type of store. I think the comic book store is still in that location though. Does anybody know, by the way, is now across the street from the science building? And if you know what is there now, what was before? What was in that location? Yes, there's several parking lots and there is a building now. That may be a bonus question if you can tell me what was across the street from the science building before it became what it is now. So actually there's two questions there. What was it and now what is it? Mental maps. Now, I know you've all tried to draw a map of some time to show somebody how to get somewhere. If you were having a birthday party and you wanted to invite all of your friends, you might draw it out on a piece of paper, photocopy it, and hand it out and say, hey, I'm having a party at my house. This is the way to get to it. Now, another thing that, sometimes you would have to say to kids when I taught in elementary school, how do you get to your house? And the kids couldn't tell me. So one of the jobs that I had them do was to interview their parents and come up with a set of directions on how to get to their house from school. And I'd always say, no, I don't want to plan on going to your house, because that did kind of frighten them. They thought I was going to come talk to their parents. But I said, no, just think of it as if you got sick and your mom, somebody was going to have to take you to your mom's house, what would you have to do? Which way do you need to turn? And I think that was probably a good idea at the time, so kids could become more aware of their own location. But whenever you draw out a map such as that, or the one that you can see on here on this slide, you're drawing a mental map. And mental maps are what we have in our minds of places that we have been and places we have merely heard of. It can also be, simply directions on how do you go somewhere. Now, does it have to be accurate? No, because it's your map. It's your mental picture. You want to try to make it as clearly as possible so that someone else who's reading your map is not going to be confused. But usually you will probably just mark the major roads that they're going to turn on. You will write down the name of that road or any kind of landmark like the mall or Target. And then you would be able to draw directions on how they were going to be going somewhere. So mental maps usually are intended to convey information about a location. Now, activity spaces are those places that we travel to routinely in our rounds of daily activity. If you go to work every day at one location, that would be an activity space. If you go to school to Pulaski Tech that every day, that would be one of those things. Um, if I'm trying to think of several others, going to church every Sunday, if you do that, that is an activity space. If you go to the bar, flying saucer every night or once a week, or anyway, those are regularly routine places that you would visit. Mental maps, by the way, include terra incognito, the unknown lands that are off limits. You are basically not drawing it on your map, so it's called the land that is not necessarily seen. You're not going to draw something that you don't want your person to know about. Why do geographers use maps and what do they tell us? Well, we have a lot of generalization in maps, mainly because it's very difficult to get all of the details on a map, depending on the scale. The larger the scale, the least detail they're going to have. We usually generalize when we draw maps, and oftentimes it helps us to see trends. Whenever we're drawing out things, you would put down, like if you're looking at the United States, the Great Plains may be on here is a certain color and it's yellow. And it is representing from this key that they're showing us somewhere between um, 12 and 20 inches of rain. Excuse me, it may be the 20 through 40 Oh no, it is the 20. It is the 12 to 20 inches of rain uh, right in there. And then right above us, we are in an area that gets between 20 and 40 inches of rain, going all the way up to toward Minnesota and the Midwest. And so those are general numbers, but we don't all get the same amount of rain. And so, there have been years where we get less and some where we've gotten hardly any. We didn't even make the 20-inch, let us know that, 15 inches. So we would be in a much drier area. But because you can't get all of these locations on your map, you are not going to, it's going to give you very little detail, and they call that generalizing. You're mixing all your data together. The wider the area is going to be considered an average of that rainfall. When we talk about mapping, we also have to talk about remote sensing and GIS, which is relatively new information. We haven't had it. This is another thing that Ms. Bradley has um, predated. I predate whiteout, pantyhose, computers, cell phones, and remote sensing and GIS. Geographers monitor Earth from distance using satellites. The remote sensing devices are in the satellites, and the technology that they have uh, improved upon over time, many years, will be able to gather data by looking down with their super sensitive cameras, and they collect this data and pull it up into their own storage facility, and then it's sent back down to Earth, where it is then generated through a computer of sorts, which can classify and categorize all the data that it is collecting. So if you were to go back to trying to figure out what is the rainfall of Arkansas, you probably would be able to use that data to be able to figure that out. Remotely sensed images can be incorporated into maps. That's the wonderful thing about using GIS, Geographic Information Systems. So remotely sensed images are incorporated in a map, and absolute locations can be studied over time by plotting change in remotely sensed images from one year to the next or 1 month to the next over time. And here on this particular slide, you're seeing um, the different tools that are used in collecting the data. In the center of the picture, you see the satellite that is in the air, and it's taking in information through these little orange streaks that, as it's taking pictures, as it goes over different things, it will pull that data up inside it, and then it will be able to pass it on to a uh, satellite dish, which then can collect it and send it to some kind of a computer where on Earth it's then processed. Another thing that you'll notice on here are several different towers which will be receiving the same kind of information that goes to the satellite dish, but it is sort of a relay station between one junction and another junction to be able to parse out the same data. You also can see in the picture on the upper left the routes as they go around the Earth and the different types of orbits there are. There's a polar orbit, there's a geostationary orbit, which goes around the Earth almost horizontally. And then there is a similar one that is a low Earth orbit, which tends to go around the equator. All of these things, and the cloud on here that we have drawn is supposed to symbolize internet, and so whatever is uploaded through a dish usually can be loaded on into the internet, and the data can be used by several other sources. Now, this picture of Concepcion, Chile, has been taken by a satellite. And so this is a satellite image of the cities of Concepcion, Hualpin, and Chile, hours after an 8.8 magnitude earthquake occurred in 2010, one of the worst in years and decades. The damage to the city is not noticeable in this satellite image, except for some small plumes of smoke that are coming off of the oil refinery in the lower left-hand corner. It looks like a scattered light from a flashlight almost over on your left-hand side. You can, in this picture, it was taken with looks like some infrareds, which they have changed to a green color so that you could identify this as being greenery. But there's also some water, and it shows some silt and pollution that has flowed into the water, which is down on the southern side. Those little lines you see that are going from the mainland outward are passing over a water source. So it could be the ocean, or it could be, just a big lake. GIS, which means Geographic Information Systems. GIS compares spatial data by creating digital representations of the environment. They combine layers of spatial data and create maps in which patterns and processes can be superimposed, can be added. So, looking at our picture on this slide, you'll notice that there are lines that are like rivers or roots. They look a lot like roots, but that's a river, and it's flowing in different directions. I'm supposing it's flowing downward into the main artery, flowing downward from mountains or some higher elevation where it will flow directly into the major river as it gets thicker. And you'll notice that someone has drawn lines on this map, little black lines, which are supposed to indicate something else that is going on in the picture. There is a large amount of red, which is supposed to indicate vegetation. And so the green here is supposed to be showing the river itself and the tributaries that flow into it. Now, this is what we call a line drawing of that same location. And you can see the directions that the rivers were pouring in, the tributaries going down to the main trunk of the river. So they have been able to lift out all of the other data and just maintain the lines that they may have drawn superimposed on top of this map to show the direction of that flow of water. So geographers can use GIS to analyze data, and then they use GIS in both human and physical geographic research. By the way, how would you know that someone had drawn this picture? That it's not just a natural picture? Mostly because the lines are straight or straighter. Most natural lines, especially ones that deal with rivers, are going to have more wiggles in them than what we see. There is an article in our book, and it's about dengue fever in Brazil, and it leads up to the time of the 2014 World Cup. And if you don't remember, there were some things that were going on about that time because people were not wanting to go into Brazil for the fear of coming down with dengue fever. Since then, there's also been the tsetse virus, which has also been a major problem for Brazil. Now, anyway, read the article, and I think you should be able to highlight it, and it should take you there from this slide. Uh, After you've read the article, list and explain 5 layers of data that you could add in an ArcGIS online to find the dengue fever outbreak in Brazil. Okay. And that may be something I can post online as an assignment for you to answer. Okay. The amount of data digested in a GIS program uh, is the power of the location and analysis that can be undertaken on a computer platform. Now, this sounds like a very confusing sentence, and it sounds like to me that something happened in the typing of this, and I did not type it, but basically they're just saying the power of your computer, how much power your computer has, really is going to make a difference on how well you can process this information that you get from the data that are pouring into your GIS. Anyway, so locational analysis can be undertaken on a computer platform, and it depends on your computer how easy it is to use this analysis. I will tell you that back in '98 we were using old gateway computers, which would crash or freeze up, or it would take 30 or 40 minutes to load a picture. So, technically it's going to be up to what kind of computer you have and how well you can manipulate this data. Anyway, so to read the sentence again, the amount of data digestible in a GIS and the ease of analysis that is possible using the GIS software applications allow geographers to answer complicated questions. Geographic Information Systems, GIS-CI, is an emerging research field concerned with the studying of development and use of geospatial concepts and techniques to examine geographic patterns and processes. Now, if you are interested in using computers and you think you might be able to do this, I highly suggest you go into the field. I believe they put most of the GIS programs over in the science department, even though it should be in the geography department. So anyway, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, why are geographers concerned with scale and connectedness? Now, scale is how much you've zoomed in on an area or how far out you have zoomed out. With telescopic lens, you can pick up a lot of details. How connected are these two things? Scale has two meanings. Scale on a map, is the distance on a map compared to the distance on the Earth. So it is a ratio. You would take the amount of the Earth that's being researched and divide it into the number of inches or centimeters that it's supposedly representing on the map. Another way of saying it is just the spatial extent of something. Geographers have interest in the scale involving the spatial extent of something derives from the fact that phenomena found at one scale are usually influenced by what is happening at other scales. Now, you would say that geographers have a lot of things going on that they're studying, but it just so happens that there are a lot of things to be studied and are impacted in our studies when you're dealing with the Earth and when you're dealing with people. So, how is it affecting anything that is happening? The scale of our research matters because we can make detailed observations at different scales. And the closer or smaller the scale, the more the details. Now, most of you have a cell phone now, and you'll know that you can look at a map of almost any place on your cell phone on this little tiny screen. However, you can also, by using your fingers, spread it out so that you're zooming in, or you can collapse it in on itself so you can become, see a smaller area. There's also in some computer programs, like for your desktop type of computer, that you just move a sliding scale bar up and down the bar to decide whether you're zooming in or zooming out. And as you zoom in, you can just see so much that you didn't see whenever you were far away. The scale at which we study a geographic phenomena tells us of what level of detail we can expect to see. Geographers are concerned with the scale, and it goes beyond an interest in the scale of individual phenomena to how processes operating at different scales influence one another. And in fact, that's almost a quote that's already been said before. The scale that you're looking at it in is going to give us information on um, how things are influencing each other. Victoria Lawson was the geographer who wrote a book called Jumping Scale, which talks about the politics involved in rescaling activities. Now, one of the things that we've not talked about yet here are regions. A formal region has a shared culture or physical trait. For example, French-speaking region of Europe depends on where you are in Europe. Um, if you're in France, you're probably going to be speaking French, but outside of France, in the rest of Europe, you may not be. At one point in time, French was the major language that was considered the language that you had to learn because everybody else had some French. Today, it's not necessarily so. In many places, you have to learn English. Um, I took French in high school. I had French in elementary school. I had French in college. What did I have to learn first when I went out of college and after I had my first jobs? German, because I've lived in Germany for 3 years. Came back to Arkansas and found that I had to start learning Spanish because we have many more Spanish-speaking people, students especially, that are moving into Arkansas. And so there are different, depending on where you are, it's going to make a difference on what kind of language that you learn to be able to communicate in another language. So a formal region could be the area in which you speak French. That could be the closest you come to the definition. It has a shared culture and a shared physical trait. In geography, a region constitutes an area that shares similar characteristics. You could say that a lot of people in the southeastern part of the United States and south central part of the United States like grits. I never did. I never could. I'm one of those people that, yes, I'm Southern. Yes, I was born here. But no, I don't like grits. Anyway, going on. But that you could almost draw a circle around the area where a majority of the people like grits. Same thing in Minnesota. There were gefilte fish or schmelt. Schmelt, they were teeny tiny fish that was a lot like a small anchovy. But the people that lived there liked gefilte fish, or they liked schmelt. That would be a region where that type of fish is the preferred. Other types of regions. We have functional regions. It's defined by a particular set of activities or interactions that occur within it. And the picture to the right of functional region definition shows all of the airports that can be, will have planes flying into Chicago O'Hare Airport. And you can see how many locations that Chicago flies out of to on a daily basis to make these trips and commuter flights. Perceptual regions are those where that have an intellectual source or construct designed to help us understand the nature and distribution of phenomena. So in this picture on the bottom side, it's talking about College Board. And I don't know if you know about College Board, but College Board was a program that handled AP programs, and if you were tested, you would be tested in this region and so on. So the College Board area, you can see, has divided up the United States. There's a New England base. There is the middle states, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. And then further south, you see the South is considered Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Florida. And we are left out of that. They have put us in Southwest. I often consider Arkansas South Central, but we haven't convinced anybody of the fact that there is a South Central. Anyway, Southwest is Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. So these are mentally viewed areas that have been categorized and put in different phenomena because of their similarities. We have enough similarities like Oklahoma and Texas that we are grouped with them. I would debate that because I feel like most of us probably are more closely related to Tennessee and Mississippi than we are with Texas and Oklahoma. But, you know, that's just my thought, my perception. So it's a perceptual region. Perceptual regions also in the United States were discussed by a geographer, a cultural geographer named Wilbur Zielinski, who identified 12 major perception regions on the series of maps in North America's vernacular regions. And supposedly these are supposed to be areas where people are going to be able to share the same characteristics. Like eating grits, you know, there are so many things that they have in common that, you know, they put these together. Now notice on this map, Arkansas is considered in the South and not in the Southwest, except for a little tiny section that's on the very far west in Arkansas. And so it's not following a state rule, it's more of a fluid line that kind of moves back and forth and probably may change. But a lot of people consider, probably they took a survey and said, which states do you think were considered in the South and which ones are in the Southwest? And so people voted and they came up with the average number. That's a perception. Where do you perceive it going? Located in predominantly African American neighborhood in Montgomery, Alabama, the street intersection of Jefferson Davis and Rosa Parks is a symbolic of the debates and disputes in the American South over how the past is to be commemorated on the region's landscape. The Civil War and Civil Rights Movement are two of the most important events in the history of that region. And that's why they keep bringing it back up. They think it's important. However, I think there can be a lot of argument to say you should never have put the Jefferson Davis in this one because he technically wasn't from Alabama. So anyway, culture itself. Culture is an all-encompassing term that identifies not only the whole tangible lifestyle of peoples, but also their prevailing values and beliefs. It is closely identified with the discipline of anthropology. Cultural geographers identify a single attribute of a culture as a culture trait. Now, looking at these lovely ladies in this picture, what are some things that you notice that they are all three have? If you were to pick out some things, you may say they all have a similar hairstyle. They are all wearing a special robe with a belt that goes around it. That's kind of a high-waisted belt. All three of them are wearing red print silk slacks or skirts. All three of them are wearing socks that have a toe location where the sandal that they're wearing can slide up into that area of their toe. There are several things. They're all three wearing very light colored makeup to make their skin look whiter than it normally is, because you can look at their hands and see their hands are not as white. I'm trying to think what else I see. They're carrying something. I'm sure it's maybe something as simple as house shoes or slippers. But they are definitely all three carrying a bag that has some sort of decoration on it. So these are culture traits, and most of the rest of the world do not dress this way, do not put their makeup on to look this way, and may not even wear those kinds of, I don't call them flip-flops because I think these are a hard-bottomed shoe. It used to be made out of wood. But anyway, it was to keep the person up off the ground an inch or two, so the underneath of the foot is at least an inch high. You can tell that those are definitely characteristics of geishas. The paper lanterns are also in the back. Behind them are also from their culture, as are probably some of the other small details which you can barely make note of in this picture. But those are culture traits. While culture is an all-encompassing term that identifies not only the whole tangible lifestyle of the people, but also their prevailing values and their beliefs. Now notice here is something that almost all cultures have. Brides. Brides who are getting married. Of course, they celebrate it in different ways. Some brides are wearing white dresses, and some brides in other locations will be wearing red dresses. Some have veils, and some do not. Some carry flowers, and some do not. Some cultures put on lots of jewelry to show their wealth, or to show that they match with all of the rest of their wardrobe. So, but they're all brides. A culture complex is more than one culture. More than one culture may exhibit a particular culture trait, but each consists of a discrete combination of traits. So while you had some brides that were wearing big long flowing dresses, you had others that were wearing dresses that were a little bit shorter, or they were flowing but they had jewelry all embossed in them. There were just a little bit of differences. One bride was in white and one was in red. A cultural hearth is an area where cultural traits develop and from which cultural traits diffuse. So where it starts is the hearth, and it diffuses from there elsewhere. A culture trait develops in more than one hearth without being influenced by its developed elsewhere, and this would be a case of independent invention. Examples of that are religion. Religions have developed in several different places in the world, and they're different religions. However, they are religion. And so the location where the religion began would be the hearth. It would spread from the hearth or diffuse outward from it. But if they're different religions, they are definitely called independent invention. They're independent of any other culture. Now, in this picture, you'll see the Under Armour logo on this t-shirt, and the story that went with this was that the Under Armour t-shirt became a big seller. It started though with a guy that he had invented it, and he was having to make sales out of the trunk of his car. And so first of all, he started with pro athletes and took his garb with him for them to try. And once they fell in love with the Under Armour uh, wear, they became very popular to younger people, and people started trying to adapt those same qualities and wear that same kind of shirt, because it meant to them, if they had the Under Armour logo on their clothes, that they were wearing clothes similar to their favorite football, basketball stars. So the Under Armour started in one place, cultural hearth. It was independent of its invention. However, it's going to spread, and so we're going to talk about diffusion. Connectedness through diffusion. There are ways that certain cultural traits are spread, and that's diffusion, how it's spread. There's expansion diffusion, is when an innovation or an idea develops in a heart and remains strong there while spreading outward. Now, their example was Islam, because Islam started in Saudi Arabia, and it spread outward from there. A lot of it traveled along the southern coast of Asia, down into India, all the way to Vietnam and Laos and Thailand, and all the small islands that make up Indonesia. So that would be the diffusion. And then contagious diffusion is like the Under Armour clothing. It's a form of expansion diffusion in which nearly all of the adjacent individuals and places are affected. So it is, in essence, a contagious diffusion. And we're going to talk about another one that's fairly similar to contagious, and that's hierarchy. Now, hierarchy usually happens whenever you have different levels of people. And I want you to think, there are football pros. Those are the stars. And under them, you probably have football players who are in college. And then under them, there are the high school players. And then under them, you'll have the junior high players, and then the elementary players. And so there are different levels. And so if something has caught on with the pro football players and they start spreading downward to these other groups, that is a hierarchy. That is a hierarchy. Okay, so hierarchical diffusion is a pattern in which the main channel of diffusion is some segment of those who are susceptible to or adopting what is being diffused. It means that they want it bad. They are susceptible to wanting it. Crocs footwear did the same thing. Body armor did the same thing. There was also, years ago, Gloria Swanson's clothing, Gloria Vanderbilt clothing. Levi's became very popular and spread from there on out. Anyway, so stimulus diffusion is where there's not all of the ideas can be readily and directly adopted by the receiving population. Yet the ideas can still have an impact. Now, these two lovely ladies on the right in the blue burqas, you can't tell what's on under their clothes. They could be wearing makeup, which they have picked up makeup tips maybe off the internet, but it's not received by the whole of the population that they live in. And so, it's not necessarily going to be something that they want anybody else to know. However, they did receive this stimulus in the advertisement, which made them want to wear their makeup. Another thing that's happening here is they are wearing the burqa, which they're forced to do because that is something that is adopted by their population. It's okay to be doing it, and so on. The lady above in the top picture has gold bands around her neck. Now, this is a pattern that is usually started in the countries where she is from, and Burma is one of them, and they will start putting different gold bands on to represent her wealth and end up, it looks like her neck is stretching out, but actually what's happening is her shoulders are being pressed downward, almost crushing her lungs. They think it's pretty in that country, and so therefore they continue to wear it, and they continue to put bands on their little children as they're growing up. Same thing happened in China with shoes. They would break the feet of little Chinese girls when they were approximately 7 years old and put them in, bound. They would bind their feet so that it would change the shape of their feet. They called them lotus. I would show you that picture if I had one, but I can't do it right now. Uh, and that was considered beautiful, and that was one of those things that almost everyone did it. It is readily accepted by their people. Now, contagious diffusion looks like the upper diagram. You can see that there is a central hearth, which is green. It's surrounded by a lavender set of dots where it is somewhat close to the original source. So it's going to spread close to the original source first, and then it will start spreading beyond this original source at a later time. So that's the later diffusion. In the contagious diffusion, the hierarchical diffusion, it isn't going to be spread necessarily to the people that are near the hearth, but it's going to be picked up and spread by different people who are interested in that particular concept. For example, on body armor clothing, 80-year-old women are not going to probably want to wear the body armor clothing, so they are probably going to be remaining these little gray dots where it's not going to be diffused at all, where the body armor uniforms went from being worn by the pro athletes. The first spin-off would be to the college athletes, and the third would probably be, the later diffusion would probably be the high school and so on. Relocation diffusion. It usually occurs frequently through migration. When people are moving from one country to another, they sometimes take things with them of their own country, and it is shown to other people, and they pick up on it and they start wanting to use it too. Also, from seeing television now and seeing movies, that's another way that it is picked up and moved. It involves the actual movement of individuals whenever it's through migration. And so when it's through this movement of individuals that have already adopted the idea, they carry it to this new distant locale where they proceed to disseminate it. Now, here is another major question, thinking about this geographically. Once you think about different types of diffusion, you will be tempted to figure out what kinds of diffusion are taking place for all sorts of goods, ideas, and diseases. Remember that any good idea or disease can diffuse in more than one way. Now, when we're talking about diseases, you would probably be thinking of something like venereal diseases, or something as like Spanish flu or E. coli or something like that. Choose a good idea or disease in an example and describe how it is diffused from the hearth across the globe, referring to at least 3 different types of diffusion. We may or may not do that. Another geographic concept. What are geographic concepts and how are they used in answering geographic questions? Okay, geographic concepts are things like place, relative location, mental map, perceptual region, diffusion, and cultural landscape. So those are concepts that we classify as geographical. Geographers use fieldwork, remote sensing, GIS, GPS, qualitative and quantitative techniques to explore linkages among people and places and to explain differences across people, places, scales, and time. Now, in our history, world history, people once thought that you were the product of your environment. And this is called environmental determinism. However, it has been majorly rejected by the geographers and um, scholars in our time period. Environmental determination holds that human behavior individually and collectively is strongly affected by, even controlled or determined by, the physical environment. Geographers argue that the natural environment merely serves to limit the range of choices available to a culture. Possibilism is the doctrine that choices that a society makes depends on what its members need and on what technology is available to them. Cultural ecology has been supplemented by the interest in political ecology. Now, when you think of possibilism, that is what is possible. Some things are, if it's environmental possibilism, they're talking about it's not set, it is something that is possible that could happen. In possibilism, when we study cultural ecology, it's an area of inquiry concerned with culture as a system of adaptation to and alteration of the environment. With political ecology, an area of inquiry is concerned with the environmental consequences of the dominant political economic arrangements and understandings. Mostly that one is going to be dealing with politics, while the other one is dealing with culture. If you were to choose a geographic concept introduced in this chapter, think about something that is of personal interest to you and consider how or whatever you have chosen could be studied from a geographical perspective. Think about space, location, landscape, place, and write a geographic question that could be the foundation of geographic study of the item you choose. I'm not going to ask you to do that, but I am going to ask you how you were influenced in choosing your favorite type of music. Who was it that passed on these ideas you have about good music to you? Who was it that was the person you adapted to and adopted their ideas about music? That is your cultural influence. How is it diffused to you? These are some other links that you're welcome to look at, and you might find some things that are important. The related resources at the bottom deal with um, some of our major points on the 5 themes, and if you need more help on understanding that, you can go to those locations. The first one, the first link up at the top, are careers in geography, and that is with the American Association of Geographers. So if you want to go and take a look, you might like it. Now, the front of our book starts with a story about Kenya's coffee plantations. Do understand that I don't understand why he put it at the very beginning of the chapter. I think he could have done better by moving it further into the chapter. But what he's attempting to do is to talk to you about how a region has changed. And here he was talking about Kenya, and once upon a time it was a wonderful environment to several tribes of peoples. But then it was taken over by some European countries, and they insisted on growing large quantities of coffee, and in some places tea, by the way, and turning most of the land into plantations. While most of the people that are working the plantations really can't afford to buy the tea and coffee. So think about it. How is it that they are living? Who's growing their groceries, their vegetables, and their meats? Who is it that is having to take care of all of those things if they can't even afford to buy a cup of coffee? There are more pictures and more slides throughout the rest of this chapter. Please feel free to look at them, and I hope you enjoy them. You may pause at any one of these